Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Matthew 7:13. My mom, as usual, inspires most of these episodes, and today she asked me to record something about heaven, hell, and purgatory. She's really stuck with purgatory. So here's what we know. And by the way, all of this is not only in our Catholic Catechism, but has been demonstrated scientifically through countless studies around the globe throughout history on near-death experiences. There have been many. It's like every scientist's favorite thing to study is near-death experiences. So this has all been validated through decades of this kind of research. But anyway, so the idea is, and Jesus just explained to us there in Matthew about, how very few people actually get to heaven, and at least right away, as far as our catechism is concerned, because we also know that God is full of love and, is full of mercy, and that Jesus died for our sins so that many of us can be spared from eternal damnation. However, some people don't want to be with God. You notice how I don't say God doesn't want them around? Some people just don't want to believe in God. There can be all sorts of signs, people around them getting miracles, getting saved, and they are so stubborn and hang on to their insolence and roll their eyes and mock God, right? They can say sacrilegious things and they just hang on to that bitterness and say, even if there was a God, I'd hate him. So this is not a loving world. Everything in life is predicated on murder. I've certainly had moments of that awareness in my own struggles with faith. And I just, I'm not playing the game. I'm sorry. I'm not interested. I don't believe it. I don't want to believe it. And even if it was true, I'd be mad at it. And that's the way we go. Those people, by their free will, because that was the gift that God gave humanity, was free will. So through the free will, they can say, guess what? Thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to be near you. So they are sent to hell, which is a place of eternal separation from God. And that is the most anguishing thing a soul will ever experience, especially knowing that it's eternal, that you screwed up and that you got it wrong. You had these so few years on earth, but they were so important to you, and filling your time with every worst possible thing that you could do on earth when there were so many other beautiful things you could have done instead. But it was so important to you to focus just on the crappy and the evil stuff and to leave a path of destruction behind, and then give the finger to God the whole time, scoffing and laughing. And now look, for the rest of eternity, not like the rest of your life here, which is already to some people too long, right? Now for the rest of eternity, you are going to stay in that loneliness and that void, except now you don't have a planet to distract yourself with. You have nothing but the eternal awareness of how stupid you were. That, is hell. Purgatory is probably, I would guess, this is not in our catechism, but in terms of what I've read through about near-death experiences, most of us will probably land in purgatory. As Jesus said, the gate is very narrow to heaven. So nothing unclean can be in heaven. You have to be pure to be in heaven. But God, in all his mercy, doesn't want to say, listen, 3/4 of you don't pass the heaven gate, but I don't want to send you all to hell, because not all of you deserve that. It's not all evil or mortal sin, or not all of you rejected me. Some of you really tried. But maybe trauma had things in your heart that you didn't know were there. Like maybe you were trauma damaged, or maybe, you were taught to be a certain way that outwardly seemed fine, but inwardly was really sinful. And you just, you didn't get it. So sins of ignorance that are true, not willful blindness, but sins of ignorance. So there's things that could happen that are your fault, yeah, because at some point maybe, you could have gotten over it, or you should have been more self-aware or whatever. You could have prayed more, I don't know, whatever. But you weren't intrinsically evil, and your intention was not to defy God. You were just ignorant or weak, but you tried, right? So those are the purgatory souls. So they stay in purgatory just long enough to purify that sin. And I mean, you would want that, right? So if you've been working your whole physical human life to make yourself a perfect, better person because you want to be a saint and you want to go to heaven. And then you get there and God says, well, you kind of missed the mark in these 3 areas, so we're gonna sit you down over here so that we can work those out of your system. And I'm imagining that would be a painful process. If you think about therapy, it's not fun. So you're digging through the crap internally, right? You got to dig through your trauma. You got to face the shadow self, they like to say, if you're Jungian. That is never a fun thing. But on the other side of that is liberation. That's like when you are forgiving somebody. So often you can't get to the forgiveness point because you don't want to, then they got off free. That's how you tell yourself, right? You say, well, if I just forgive them, then that means like they got away with what they did, and that's not fair. And what Jesus tries to tell us through the scripture is it's not even about them. The forgiveness is more to liberate you, because odds are these people that have hurt you are not losing any sleep. They're not feeling bad. And even if they are feeling bad, that doesn't help you at all unless you know about it, right? But you're never going to know potentially. So now you're just living the rest of your life seething in resentment. You're going to end up with cancer. You're going to end up having a stroke or whatever it is, the negative, or become bitter. And then if you're bitter, you ruin every other area of your life. Right? You keep love from you. You keep yourself from enjoying the rest of your life because you're seething in bitterness. So when you're forgiving the other person, the benefit isn't to them. God will deal with them. It's for you to not walk around with that weight on your heart. Because if you think about it, the people that you have forgiven for whatever reason, you got the grace to be able to forgive some people. How great is it? How great is it that you can hear their name and your stomach doesn't churn? Or that just seeing something that reminds you of them doesn't ruin your whole day, right? So it's liberating for you, forgiveness. It's such an important part of the human experience. It's so important that it made it to the Lord's Prayer, and it's tied to our daily bread, right? So if you read the Lord's Prayer, God's forgiveness of us is completely dependent on our forgiveness of others. So that's huge, huge to consider. And is hugely relevant when it comes to how much time in purgatory you have to do. Because many, 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 many times, the sins that we're committing have to do with us being wronged and acting badly or letting it change us in a way that's really negative. Or, for example, and sometimes the sinning is so subtle. And here's the problem. I feel like we can't talk about hell and purgatory and consequences without talking about the deceiver, the devil. Because the problem is in the moment when they say, oh, the devil tempts you, there's a part of us that expect this magical being to appear and that the temptation will be obvious and it will come in a voice that is not your own. And that's not how it works. As a matter of fact, the devil can even disguise himself as dead relatives of yours, which is why the Catholic Church allows you to pray for the dead, allows you to have masses said for the dead, but tells you not to talk to the dead. That's why they don't let you go to mediums, because they can... once you're on the other side, you're on the other side. And it's very rare that God will allow a dead relative to come speak to you. Very, very rare. When the Holy Spirit wants you to know something, you'll know it in the world. You'll get signs in the actual physical world that come from God, and it's unmistakable. So when you're getting messages, even good ones, even things that might appear to you as a miracle, especially then, you have to be very careful that it is actually coming from God and not you being deceived. So there's very strict, so they're saying don't pray to your dead relatives, because that could very easily be a trick. And a demon will actually take the face of your dead relative and start coming to you in dreams, or having weird synchronicities. You think you're praying to your grandma, and instead it's a demon. So, when you have those moments, which you sometimes will have in life, and they can be very comforting and life-changing also, just be very, very mindful and always test it. Always test it, and always start to pray immediately to ensure that it is actually coming from God. So when you're being tested in the moment, sometimes it's really subtle, and it's not always, the huge mortal sin where you're going to go and rob an old lady or stab somebody. The sins that land you in purgatory are the subtle ones that are easy for you to rationalize. And this is when we get deceived by the deceiver. So let me give you an example. Let's say in your workplace, it is common for people to do something like steal paper, right? You're printing your personal stuff, on company merchandise. That's pretty innocuous, right? No one's dying. No one's getting hurt. The company's not going broke. There's no huge thing. Everybody does it. Everybody in your office does it. Everybody in your office takes home some toilet paper or steals the odd pen or whatever it is, right? And they all do, or they leave a few minutes early and they don't clock out. There's a few things that become the norm in your office that everybody does, and it would be so easy to tell yourself, that's the norm of my environment. But in deep in your heart, on some level, well, if the president of the company were here, would I do it? My manager might do it, but would I do it if the president of the company was here? And does she do it in the presence of the president of the company? Or when my coworkers are doing it, yeah, everybody does it, but do they do it when the manager's in the bathroom or on a day off? Or do they do it right in front of them? Because if these are things that are even subtly being gotten away with, do you want to participate in that? Okay, it's not as horrible as robbing an old lady, right? There's the degree of sin, which is why we have mortal sins and venial sins. But don't kid yourself, that's a venial sin. As a matter of fact, it's actually not. It's a mortal sin because it's theft. That's one of the 10 commandments. Do not steal. But it's subtle. It's small, right? Taking the extra sampler at Costco. You know what I mean? It's so small. But it's in these little tiny moments that your true heart for Christ gets revealed. When you tell yourself, if they're doing it, I should be able to do it. Sin, that's the devil, right? No one will know, that's the devil. It doesn't harm anybody, really, that's the devil. It's subtle. It's subtle. And God has a lot of grace for that kind of trickery because he gets that it's hard and it can be confusing. But at the same time, we are also held to an intellectual standard of don't try and fine print me. Don't try and think God is stupid to know that you could tell, well, I didn't really know. And it was just, everybody else did it. God's not stupid. God is not stupid. So if you are willfully rationalizing that, you're skirting the depths of hell at that point. But if it's really done out of ignorance, maybe you're a bit avarice because you grew up in poverty and your parents were poor, and so they put scarcity in your heart and in your mind, and then you walk through the world in a scarcity mindset, which was probably miserable for a lot of people, but it was innocent and it came from trauma. That's a little bit different. That's okay, where you're going to sit in purgatory. But someone that says, I am greedy because I want it all and I am the smartest, so I should have the best, and I don't care who I have to walk over and stomp on in order to get that, that's very different than even the person in a scarcity mind. They'll both be in scarcity mindset. But there's a good person in scarcity mindset who goes through life trying to do their best, but inevitably screws up over and over and over again just because of how they think, right? So for example, maybe you're always going to give your employees the absolute minimum legally that you have to, right? That's scarcity. It may not be malicious. You're following the law and you're not doing it to be mean. You're doing it because you're in scarcity mindset. The law tells you to pay $10. You pay $10. You don't question it. You want the best for everybody. You provide a decent working environment, whatever. That's scarcity mindset in one way, and it will be very annoying to everybody around you because you'll never treat anybody to lunch. You'll always just do the bare minimum, and so you're only ever going to get the bare minimum. But if you're evil and you say, I'm going to find a way to skirt the law so that my employees, I pay them less because maybe, I take money away for the time they take on breaks and lunches, right? So, and you you have a punitive approach to how you run your business, and you want to get away when it's an insidious thing. That's going to land you in hell. I know that God wants me to be nice to people, but I don't care. Or I don't believe in this God, so whatever, I do what I want. That lands you in hell. So there's the difference. I think it's all in intent, but you have to be very careful because so many times the deceiver, you will convince yourself that it's not bad intentions, that you had good intentions for doing the thing. Here's a simple one. Okay, here's a simple one. And I know this because I've witnessed this with people I know that have got terminal illnesses or been very ill. And maybe what they need is they need somebody to make them something that they can eat, right? Or, organize laundry to be done. Or maybe even, I'm scared to die and I have to plan my funeral. Can you sit with me and help me plan my funeral? I've witnessed this, where the people on the receiving end of that message will say, oh, no, don't think like that. Don't think like that. No, we have to think positive. You're going to beat this. You don't understand how lonely the dying person is when you do that. And you're not doing that to try and keep them positive. That's what you're telling yourself. But what you're doing it is because you don't want to have that conversation. When you're facing your friend's mortality and helping them plan your funeral, you're sort of also looking at your own, right? So it's uncomfortable, it's depressing, it's awkward as hell to sit with someone who might be dying. What do you say? You're scared of saying the wrong thing, so you don't say anything. And then instead, you're forcing your friend to go through the shittiest moment of their life alone for your own comfort, and you're going to tell yourself you're doing it for them. Very, very selfish. I guarantee that'll land you in purgatory. Or to say, I love baking cinnamon rolls. It makes me feel good. I'm going to bake them. Even though they can't eat, they're taking chemo and everything makes them barf. I'm still, because I love to make them and mine are beautiful, I'm going to make cinnamon rolls and I'm going to drop them and I'm going to take a selfie of myself delivering cinnamon rolls, and I'm going to expect my poor friend to take a picture of her bald from chemo holding these cinnamon rolls. I want to make her barf so I can look like a saint on social media. Now, you're not going to say it to yourself like that, but believe me, that's what's happening, right? When so many times the charity that we are imposing on people isn't what they actually need, but what we like to do to tell ourselves we're good people. By the way, Luciferianism teaches this very strongly. As Luciferianism will take sometimes the ego vanity sins that Christians will start to cultivate unknowingly, and Luciferianism calls all of that out. So on that one sense, that philosophy is useful, that is very aware of the ego tricks being a religious person can sometimes play on you. Like, for example, when you're so severe in the religion, you're devoid of all joy, right? That actually can sometimes harm the evangelization of your religion, right? So what they'll do, the devils will convince you not to give up your religion because they know you're too devout, so you're never gonna. So instead what they do is they make you misappropriate your religion or use your religious beliefs against you. To say, oh, see, you got to be like this, and then you unknowingly turn people away from the faith, using your faith, right? So it is that's why Pope Francis always says, don't dialogue with the devil. Don't. And as soon as you start to rationalize to yourself, well, they do this, so I should do this, right? Or this makes me feel good, so I'm going to do this for them. They should want me to do this for them, right? It's going to make me look good. The second you're tempted to do something nice so that you can tell other people you did it, right? All these are subtle religious sins. Very subtle. But that's the sort of thing that if you have that in your heart, maybe you're great everywhere else. You're the most loyal spouse. You're the best parent. You do everything good for your community sincerely, not because you want the accolades or whatever, just because you love it. You're good in every other way, but you screw up here. And it's unintentional. You don't mean to be a jerk. It's just your ego is a bit this, and so it makes you a little boastful maybe, or whatever, and it's a bit of a turn off to God. No, you're not going into heaven. You're not going to get to hang out with the saints right away. No, I'm sorry. You don't get an automatic via participation trophy. Purgatory is your participation trophy. Purgatory is saying, well, you know what? You're not quite heaven material, but I don't know that you're hell material either. So just sit in the corner until I figure out what to do with you, right? In the simplest terms, you can look at it that way. And then, in that time, in that awareness, you kind of sit in your awareness and you know what you did wrong, and God starts to purify that out of you. And then when you've transcended all of that, then you can join everybody else in heaven. So there's heaven, hell, and purgatory. And heaven, obviously, is everything that is promised to be, so I don't really need to dig into there. Everything's good. Everybody's happy. Now, when you look at near-death experiences in terms of the numbers, I think only 15-20% of people that die momentarily actually have a near-death experience. Some might say that if you haven't, maybe you're on your way to purgatory, right? That's why you didn't see the light, is because you were on your way to purgatory. You weren't going to hell, because that's instantaneous. Apparently, the moment you die, if you're destined for either heaven or hell, you're there instantly. So if you didn't see anything, hey, thumbs up, you weren't going to hell. So either you weren't ever going to die, so you weren't even near the death plane. That's probably most likely. Or they haven't experienced enough to be judged yet, again, because it's not your time. That's why you didn't see anything. So it's not that there's nothing there. It's that you weren't close enough to it to ever see anything. Those that were, sometimes they're allowed to get a little bit closer to permanence, because of the physical situation, the ambulance hasn't got there yet, or whatever the case may be, or because there's a timing, like even that near-death experience was a grace of God to give you a message, to give you a chance to either, change something or do something or whatever, so that you can avoid hell, maybe. So hopefully that happens there too. And it does happen, because there's many, many reports of that, saying it's not your time, we're sending you back, you need to do this. There's more you need to do. But of the people, so of the 20% that have near-death experiences, I think it's closer to 15 actually, 80%, 80 to 85, say that it's a joyful experience. And often they see the white light, but although scientists in honesty, neurological science, is trying to prove that white light is actually a physiological thing that's happening in your brain. But most will report a garden. My own dad saw a garden. He also was resuscitated. He was livid when we brought him back. He was so mad. He said it was the most beautiful, he's not a religious man. He said it was the most beautiful place he'd ever been. It was a beautiful garden, and there were women with white dresses everywhere, and they were beautiful. So that was his near-death experience. So 85% there say it's lovely. So that's pretty affirming, right? And then there have been a few that say that it's absolute horrendous. Of the ones that are horrendous, they divide them into two categories. There's the evil, which is absolutely horrific. The descriptions are awful. You can look into them on Google yourself or YouTube. And some say that those that commit suicide and are unsuccessful and are resuscitated will often say that they're in a place of sadness, loneliness, and isolation, which ironically is exactly how most describe when they're living. So what it sounds like is whatever you're feeling in life is you carry to the other side. So if you fill your life with joy and happiness and kindness and generosity or whatever, Even if you don't go to heaven right away, your time in purgatory can be short. People praying for you help. And even then you say, well, I don't understand how praying for me helps my soul once I'm dead. And it's because, well, if years after you're dead, people are still thinking about you in a kind way and hoping that you're in heaven and that things are doing well for you, then you must have really had an impact on their life. For all these years later, people still care about you. That says something to God. That says something to God. How many people are actually mourning the loss of this person? They may not be perfect, but wow, they touched their whole community. The whole community turned out for their funeral, or half the town still praying for them a year later, talking about them. That has a huge impact. And so maybe, most people aren't community known or whatever, and the only people they touch are their family. I am sure that our prayers to our family members to say, okay, you know what, she was a dearly beloved, not just grandmother, but mother and aunt and cousin, because everyone's still talking about her. I'm sure God sees that for my grandmother, because we're constantly evoking her memory in our family and across the family. So for sure, that's noticeable, to God. And God even says in the scripture, in one of the parts of the Old Testament, he says that God was watching people speak. So not that he was listening or that he was communing with them and they weren't praying, that sometimes he just listens to how people speak. Even when we're not praying to him, he's listening. So how we behave, what we carry in our heart, how we treat other people, how we treat our personal values day to day, all the times when it could be easy to do the right thing, to do the wrong thing, that you could get away with it and you can convince yourself why you should do it and you don't do it, that gets you closer to heaven. And it's in the little things. It's not the grandiose, I didn't murder anybody in my life. How many times did you tell a white lie? How many times did you put your needs before others? How many times did you harbor resentment against people? How many times did you not forgive? How many things did you die with unforgiven in your heart? That's the big one. If you can die with zero resentment, you're already 3/4 of the way there. So these are the big things you have to focus on. And the idea is that if you spend your entire life operating in a manner that pleases the Lord, that you will get to heaven. But before you get to heaven, your life will be pretty good. Because if you go around the world being kind to people, never uttering a lie, being honest to a fault, right? Being generous, being kind, being loving to everybody, your life's going to be pretty fantastic. It's when you go around being crappy to people that you experience a lot of negativity. Now, does that mean that as a positive, lovely, honest person that you're never going to suffer? Of course not. Things will still happen. The difference is, though, when something happens to you, people around you are more likely to step up and help and to be your hero, or that, life will be kinder to you because you're kinder to it. So there's a reciprocity in life. So it's not just about getting to heaven. The point is that the process to getting to heaven after death is creating heaven here on earth. So if you're going to take into the other side where you are now. So even if your life, you're not in a beautiful place. So maybe you live in a terrible city. Maybe you live somewhere miserable and your lifestyle is miserable and you hate your job and you're living in squalor because life is unfair sometimes, economies are unfair, and you got the shitty end of the stick. If you are walking through that reality, still full of love, still helping your neighbor, still being positive and joyful. And I've been to places and I've seen things in the world that are supremely unjoyful, and you'll find the most joyful people in that deprivation, in that poverty, and they are still joyful. They are still believers, right? So that is the magic right there. Is that even if you can internalize that joy that comes with Christ and the believing in Christian values, even when you are facing life circumstances that are difficult and depressing to everybody else, you will still be joyful. If there's one thing that people say about Christians, is that we're joyful. If you listen to Kat Von D is very interesting because she was quite pagan and she was a big celebrity. And she herself said that one of the first things, before she even started looking at theology or the rules or whatever, just by looking at the lifestyle and the amount of joy of people around her. And she said, everybody that was dealing with the occult, they were smart and sometimes, all right, but more than not, their life was up and down. Many of them were struggling financially. Their families were a mess. Their lifestyles were toxic. And every Christian I knew had a happy family, had a peaceful life, a good job, financial success. And it was the fruits of that first attracted her to the tree. It wasn't the tree. It wasn't the Bible. It was the joy in Christians compared to the sullenness in people around her from her field of the occult and from secularism. And she thought to herself, well, how do I get that joy? Why are you so joyful? And every single time in a person she found that was joyful, the answer was Christ. And so that led her to Christianity. And now she's a big vocal celebrity voice for Christianity. I believe she joined the Baptist religion. Although today I noticed she posted inside what looked like either an Orthodox or a Catholic church. So she's clearly traveling. So let's see if maybe she'll come to Catholicism. But whatever, I'm just glad she's back under a Christian denomination. And it was an interesting process, that it wasn't anything in the Bible that drew her to Christ. It wasn't some moment where she got a huge illumination. It was just comparison in the people around her, that Christians were joyful and others weren't. Very simple. So if you follow the ways that get you to heaven, you'll have a good life. And if you have a good, happy life and you're living in joy and purity, you get to heaven. See what I mean? It's like chicken and egg thing. So that's the trick, is to find your joy and to do it in a way that's godly and to follow the commands that are given to us in joy. Not because we have to, not because we're just obedient to some weird set of rules that don't mean anything. It's like, it's not just rules for the sake of rules. This is your recipe. This is your instruction manual to live a happy life. And no matter what you're going to face in this world, because you're going to face some really evil people and some really shitty situations, we have a book for that. Everything you might need, every strategy, everything, business, law, whatever you need is in that book. And if you follow the tenets of that book and you absorb the wisdom of that book, you will walk through the world in a way that creates a joyful life, and you will carry that joy into heaven.